picture to you. Oh, there we go.
And we're live. Good evening, my whiskey brothers and sisters, and welcome to the 4th episode of the Alberta Scotch Society and Friends Whisky Book Club. As always, we are honored to have you, the viewer, our panel, and Davin de Kergommeaux, the author of Canadian Whisky, the new portable expert. And he's with us tonight, as you can see in the little square. This is an exciting night for me because not just because I get to spend it with you most excellent people, but because we are dealing with a subject matter that's dear to my heart. My major in my undergraduate degree was history. My current passion, as a lot of you know, is whiskey. And Davin in section 4 of this book is bringing it all together. So it's beautiful. I'm really happy. But enough about me. Let's do some roundtable introductions with your name, your other platform handles, your other names, and tell us what's in your glass. Davin, as always, we're starting with you, and I'm going to make you large.
And he's gone.
Well, there he is.
Cool.
Not supposed to pick the host.
De Kergommeaux, I wrote this book. Davin, I wrote the book that we're talking about tonight. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Davin DEK, DAVINDEK. Okay. Next.
And what do you have in your glass there tonight, Davin?
I'm drinking Gooderham and Worts, the standard entry-level Gooderham and Worts, which is kind of become my go-to whiskey lately.
All right. Good stuff, Ryan. We're going to you.
All right. My name's Ryan, and I'm part of the Alberta Scotch Society. And I'm here sipping on some Lot 40.
Beauty. Yukon Dave, you're up, bud.
Hi, it's Yukon Dave here, and I'm drinking some Two Brewers number 20, which just released this week.
And what type of bottle is that? It's innovative, and you'll tell us why it's innovative later, right?
It's a glass bottle, and it's got.
Okay, I'm cutting you off. You're done.
Hi, my name's Kent. I also am known by Whiskey Ass, and I'm following Dave, the innovative Draw 20, and yeah, wow.
Well,
it just came out this week, so it's a popular.
Just dropped.
I'm Nick with Whisky Belles, and tonight I am drinking Dylan's Rye Whiskey to go completely different.
Ooh, where'd you find it, Nick? I was looking for that. Couldn't see it.
Sherbrooke.
Oh, jeez. Okay. And all I have to do is go there and ask the people. Sherbrooke's closed here, but you go to the door, ask them for something, they find it. I haven't. So I'm following suit with Davin, Gooderham and Worts, but I'm doing the 4-grain blend. So we're going to be a little bit different. Davin, the one in your book is the one you have right now, correct?
Yeah, 4 grain, same as you.
Oh, you're on 4 grain as well?
Yep, that's the basic entry level Gooderham and Worts.
Well, look at me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get everyone on the same page. I like that better. There we go. Davin mentioned this previously, but the first thing that I took note of in this chapter that we're doing, so we're doing chapter 10, 11, 12, 13. It's the beginning of section 4. And he said this before, and it shook me then. But as I was reading this chapter, I saw that, again, our Canadian whiskey heritage is not linked to Scotland or Ireland, but rather to England, Germany, and the Dutch. How surprised is our panel about this?
Rather surprised.
Well, I was surprised that the Dutch got in there.
Like with the rye, right?
Pardon me?
With rye. I think they were doing the rye. Were they not that?
Just never envisioned the Dutch doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I wasn't too surprised because when you look at Canadian history, we're founded by immigrants, which came predominantly from those countries. So, of course, they're going to be bringing their drinking influences with them.
Well, my Irish heritage has a lot of drinkers way back in the Shaw family name. And I was surprised that the Irish didn't bring something to the table. But Davin told us previously that they were interested more in rum. Is that right there, Davin?
Well, they were interested more. They were interested more in alcohol, and they really didn't care what kind of alcohol. That's true. The Scottish were the same. They just wanted alcohol, and since they mostly settled in areas that had access to the Caribbean, they made rum because they could get molasses, and it's a lot less work making alcohol from molasses than it is from grain.
All righty. I'm going to start this question with one of my favorite quotes from the section, and I feel sorry already to one of our friends on this panel because I apparently stole his quote again, but this is one of my favorite quotes. So page 93. His son Thomas, the only Molson with a passion for distilling whiskey, was effectively, and it turns out unnecessarily, disinherited. Thomas outlived his cousin wife. Isn't that a fantastic quote? His cousin wife. It's good. Now, 2 parts. So did anyone know that Molson's was linked to whiskey whatsoever? I did not. And further to this, has anyone ever heard of Molson's practice of, at the time, of adding an 1.5 inch piece of soap to prevent the still from boiling over? Because I know in Scotland they had kids with brooms smacking down the froth, the foam, and now they have propeller blades kind of cutting it down. Using soap surprised me. When I read that, it really, really surprised me. Did anyone else hear about that whatsoever?
No, that was actually quite interesting. It makes sense. I mean, typically when we're doing like pasta or anything, we put a wooden spoon across the top of the pot, which will stop it from boiling over as well.
Fan it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, to actually have soap in it, I just can't see that being very good for the drinking aspect of it.
Well, I think that was there to break the surface tension so that it didn't foam as much. Because aren't they using modern defoamers in that kind of product, those kind of systems now?
Well, I can tell you 20 years ago, touring distilleries in Scotland, I heard commonly of them putting soap in the mash.
Really?
Again, yeah, and it was there as a surfactant.
Yeah.
They might use a modern surfactant now, or they might not do it. They might use something else. But yeah, I heard from some of the old timers that they used to put soap in the mash, just as a matter of course.
So maybe not a common knowledge thing because it sounds a little bit off. It sounds a little bit unpalatable. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't know about you, but I've had my mouth washed out with soap before, and it was not a pleasant thing.
Again, it was 1.5 inch square in how many liters, right?
Yeah.
Big that. So the amount of soap that actually would be into the content would be so minor that it would be just washed away.
So,
it wouldn't survive
would it have been
distillation.
Yeah.
Davin, would it have been a commercial soap, or would it have been something made which would have had a lard base to it, so it would add extra oils to the actual product, and that helped to be some of that diffuser?
Well, it would have been a soap that was made, 150 years ago, whether it was commercial or not. I got this from reading his diary, and he did not specify where he got the soap.
Oh.
But back then, the soap must have been very basic. It's not like the soap we have today.
Lard and ashes is what I would assume. But I don't know.
Well, would there not be some lye in there as well?
Some caustic,
Could be some lye. Yeah, but they may get lye from the ashes. Yeah, I don't really know.
Alrighty. Thank you. And I'm glad other people heard about this. I'm just the one out of it in this case. But yeah, it makes sense scientifically, but the idea of the soap kind of backfired on my brain a little bit.
Yeah.
Question for everybody. Would you still be a whiskey drinker right now if all our whiskey was distilled one time, like it was then? It came out as 20% roughly, and not aged whatsoever. Would you still be a whiskey drinker now? Just a show of hands, do you think that would actually show up? I don't know.
I'd have to try it before I could tell you.
Yeah.
You like watering down your whiskey to try to get the flavors out of it, so it's not so bad. If you go 50-50 like we do to figure it out,
But
Yeah.
but the whiskey we're watering back is distilled a couple of times and aged, and so it's not a low wine that's just run through charcoal.
Right.
So two different things.
Yeah. Well, not only that though, is I mean they're producing it at roughly around 20%, and then it would go out and the bartenders or whoever was shopping it out, were then watering it down some more. So I mean, mostly you were just drinking water with a little bit of
I think that's what they meant in the Bible when they said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." You should not adulterate your 20% wines with water to make them even weaker than they already were.
But back then, that's all they had. So how did they know there was anything better?
Well, that's just it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it kind of makes sense a bit. And actually, Davin, I'm pretty sure you said this in the book, how they were able to drink so much at the time, or you see whatever videos, and you've got an 8-ounce glass and they've got like 6 ounces of it and they're just pounding it back. It's like, I'm all right. Yeah.
It's like strong beer.
Yeah, the quote actually is explaining to some extent, at least, why our ancestors were able to drink so prodigiously and do an honest day's work.
Yeah.
But beer was lower alcohol also back then. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Might that have been because of the yeast, Dave? I'm guessing for beer it was a yeast thing. For the distilling, they just didn't distill it the second time. But do you think
it costs more money?
Maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Sorry, caught me in mid-drink. I love the idea of towns developing into commercial centers around as a result of whiskey and around whiskey. It feels very Scottish to me, but maybe I shouldn't be saying that, because I was thinking that as I'm reading the book, I couldn't think of a town that had been around before the 1830s that were built around the distillery. And we think of Campbellton, and we think of other towns in what used to be huge centers at the turn of the century, so the 1900s. But I'm wondering if you guys have heard of any of them that started off in like the 1800s in Scotland or anywhere else over beer or Scotch.
Well, historically, you think of like the southern states when they were producing whiskey, or in many cases rum, it was built around the plantation. And I'm thinking a lot of that too in the UK. It was built around around the state that the British was ruling would produce the local whiskey.
Well, go back in history with the breweries. The breweries popped up because the guys were mining, or there was lumber, or there was something there. They were there to service the people.
Yeah, because there was one, I don't remember, somewhere I was reading that the distillery came up because there was actually a coal mine there, so it worked out well for the distillery. They used the coal to heat their pot stills, and then the coal mine dried up, so the distillery went away as well.
Oh no.
But that's the commercial center, and then the booze came later. I'm wondering if we know of anything where booze came first and everything else came out around to support the booze.
I can't imagine that actually happening.
Yeah.
So if you built a distillery in the middle of nowhere, who would you sell to?
Yeah.
Well, Davin, you tell us, but Corby started off as a grain. Were they grain?
Yeah, there was a mill there. Yeah, most of these people started off as millers. You know, making whiskey was really kind of, they did it to dispose of waste. It was a waste disposal unit. What they did is they took the waste grain and they distilled it and made it into cattle feed, and what was left over was the alcohol, which they then sold. You know, look at a place like Gooderham Worts. They never intended to make whiskey, and they didn't sell the whiskey for at least a full generation. What they did is they sold it to merchants, who then turned around and sold it as whiskey. But I mean, they really were just trying to get rid of waste grain in the distillery, and they had a big feedlot, so they took the distillers' dry grains and used that to feed cattle and hogs. I think
so. When you were writing about Corbyville, they started off. It didn't start off as well. When did they go to whiskey in Corbyville?
Well, you know, there was a mill there already.
Yeah,
and then Corby bought the mill, and it took them a couple of years to get the mill going. And then I think it was another couple of years before they started actually making whiskey.
Right. Okay. And we've come to the point, and I'm trying to do this in a half an hour, guys. You got to stick with me. Now we are doing our tasting portion. We're right in the middle of our broadcast. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, the beautiful liquid in front of us. Does anyone want to go first? I usually throw Davin up there first.
Well, I'll go first if you go second, Dolph, because we're both drinking the same whiskey, which is this Gooderham & Worts 4-grain. This is a whiskey that shows a lot of balance. It has, the 4 different grains in it, so you get influence of the wheat, you get influence of the corn and rye, and also barley in there. So it's really got a lot of diversity. Shows all different flavors, but they're nicely knitted together. No sore thumbs, nothing sticking out. It's not an extreme whiskey. It's a very quaffable, very drinkable whiskey, and I really quite enjoy it. I often use it to compare other whiskeys too. When I'm when I'm doing a tasting and I want to figure a whiskey out, I'll use this as the one in the second glass because I'm fairly familiar with Gooderham & Worts. So I really enjoy this whiskey.
I should have bought that today. I looked at it and I thought, I bet you somebody's going to do that. So,
well, Dr. Don liked it as well last week, and I think he said something about it initially, and that's when it stuck in my mind to get it this week. And I did. I bought this specifically for it. The nose for me, I get the rye spice on the nose first, then the floral. I don't know what type of fruit I'm getting, Davin. I'm not placing it yet. It's not apple. It's not banana.
Might be some raspberries.
Raspberries? Okay. Red berry, I could go for that. It's just not citrus. I was looking for the basic. No. And I'm really not sure how long this is aged. I'm going to say 3 to 5 years. It's a young whiskey. The finish is kind of medium short, but everything else, it is balanced. I'm going to agree with you completely. I get a flavor of bubble gum. And I did this with the Whiskey Dive, who's been with us a couple times. A taste, but a specific bubble gum. The bubble gum that we used to get in hockey cards or baseball cards, that long, really thick.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a flavor I'm getting on it on the palate. It's
all that white powder that you're tasting.
Yeah, that's it. And it, you know what? You get flavor from this bubblegum piece for maybe 10 seconds or something, right? And then it was rock hard. But
yeah, you didn't dare drop it because it shattered into a million pieces.
yeah, absolutely. If you drop your pack of cards, same thing. They're in pieces, and you have to try to get it. And yeah, medium long. It's the rye. I think the wheat really adds to this. And I'm not a wheat whiskey drinker usually. I've only had probably 3 or 4 in my life that I probably remember. And it is very light without having oily texture to it, which I like. It's creamy and it's velvety. After what Dr. Don said to me last week, saying there's a difference between light. No, what did he say? Oily and what?
Creamy.
And cream.
I'm calling it creamy and oily, and he was all over me. He's like, one's from the heads, one's from the tails. What are you talking about, Dolph? So I'm
talking about mouthfeel.
I like the mouthfeel. It's velvety is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I think that's from the wheat. The corn, you can taste the sweetness with it. Yeah, I like it. So to tell you the truth, this is the first time I've had it. I think I've had it in tastings. But as most of you know, when you go to a tasting and you have 80 different whiskeys available, everything blends together unless it's your first couple of the night. So I didn't remember this one very well, but I'm really happy I picked it. So I'm good. Who's up next? Anyone?
Well, Dave, you're doing the same one. So I'm just going to bow to Dave because...
No, I heard let's do it this way. You do the tasting notes, and I'll give you all the facts and figures. And I actually got the maple whiskey to go with it.
Well,
good idea.
Or the maple, sure.
I have a hard time getting past the maple. It is so delicious and sweet that I'm having problems getting beyond it.
We should be on side-by-side screens.
Yeah. I don't know if he can split the two of us.
Not two together. I'm doing that or everybody. Yeah, I can't get just two of you. I could play though and try to figure it out and make everyone sick in the background as it pops back and forth.
No, all right.
But
Yeah.
Dave, go ahead and talk about it. And because you gave me a taster of this, I'm going to go get my taster so I can taste it as well. So I'll be right back. Keep talking, Dave.
Okay, so I'll give the facts and figures here if that's okay.
Yeah.
So there's the bottle. Let me see if I can do this. It's
Actually,
in our
yeah.
It's in our innovative line. There you go, Kurt. That's a good job. This one, we had a character from Whitehorse come to us and asked to put his maple syrup. We should go to a full screen on this one.
Oh, let's get you on there, Dave. Dave.
That's for this.
Nope. Keep it up there. There you go.
So, can you see that?
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
Whiskey barrel-aged maple syrup, Canadian product, crafted in Yukon.
Well, and I read his label here, and it's really interesting. So this is from, what's the company name again here? The Maple Rush. And it says it's from a single forest unblended. So it's none of that multi-forest crap that we all talk about. It's a single forest, Canadian maple, and it's from Quebec. I know you guys are running down Ontario maple a couple weeks ago. So this is the best of the best of the best. So he came and we let him use a couple of our barrels, and over 2 years we transferred the whiskey and the maple back and forth, and that's what came out of it. We had 1,055 bottles. Comes out at it comes out at 40% alcohol, and I asked why such a low thing. And Al, our other part of the two brewers, said we only had 2 barrels of the maple, so he wanted to extend how many barrels we had out there. He also thought that it may be a little. He thought it would be much better at this lower ABV. It's just so sugary and full bodied and mouth coating. And it was
This is very much a dessert dram. It is so sweet that you can't drink a lot of it, but the one you do drink is just amazing. And I think the higher alcohol would actually have ruined it. It would give it too much burn for the sugar that's there. That's
kind of what Al was alluding to. I read his notes, but then screwed it up, so I can't remember everything.
Dave, I'm just going to throw us a nose or a smell I get and tell me if you think I'm kind of on. White, what's it called? It's a pop, it's white, sometimes it's red. Cream soda, white cream soda.
Oh, okay.
See if you get that.
Well, how can I tell you you're wrong? Because you get bananas all the time, and I never do.
Oh, I always get the bananas, but not real bananas. The marshmallow bananas is what I get.
Okay. So,
and Bull Barley's asking when it's hitting the shelves there, Dave. So it came out.
Just hit the shelves Wednesday. So depends where he lives. I can tell him where it is. Sherbrooke's got it.
Little guys
got it. Kagan Cork's got a few bottles of it left.
Well, and that's if he's in Edmonton. I'm not sure where he is. Yeah. Where are you from there, Bull? I'll tell him. So I'm going back to this. We can all see each other now. Good stuff. And Ryan, we're going to end off with Nick. We're going to go next to you.
Okay. Well, I'm drinking Lot 40.
Okay.
And this is definitely a rye whiskey. And I really enjoy it. I find I don't get a lot off the nose, but I definitely get a lot of mouthfeel. I get a lot of heat, a lot of heat from the alcohol, which is always surprising to me because I'm able to drink some of the cask strength, and I don't find I get a lot of burn from it. But from this one, I do. But it quickly is replaced by almost a peppery taste and some of the stereotypical rye flavors, the rye spices that you get, like the nutmeg and the ginger.
Yeah.
And then it mellows out in my mouth. And then after that, there's a short aftertaste, but it seems to go away. But very easy to drink. as I'm drinking it, as we're doing this talk, I find that initial burn that I was describing has since gone away, and so I'm just enjoying the flavor of this, and it's great.
Excellent. And Nick, you are up. Thanks, Ron.
So I'm drinking Dylan's Rye whiskey. It is 3 oak, and I went out. I had to call for this. I couldn't go to the store. So it was really interesting to see what they actually brought out. I love the bottle on this. So I'm going to show it. It has the whole process from grain to glass.
That's a nice bottle.
So really cool. This is done in New Ontario oak, New American oak, first fill bourbon, and it's 100% Ontario rye. It's at 43%. So I wasn't too sure what I was going to get. The nose is pungent. It is very woody to the point where I'm thinking spruce sap.
Really?
Wow.
The mouth is kind of interesting. You get that initial hint that you're going to get that pepperiness with rye, and then it vanishes. It goes very dry, and you get on the back end a little bit of dried lemon peel, orange peel, that citrus peel, and that feel in the mouth of eating cocoa nips. So it's that tannin-like husk feel. So it's kind of interesting.
And what's the price point on it?
This was $44.
Oh, good price.
Really good price.
Yeah. Just good enough for the bottle. And when you're done, I think something like a really dark liquid to put in there so you could actually see it would be really cool. Yeah. Right? Because it's got white, so I think that'd be really, really cool.
Yeah, no, it is very
It's a display whiskey after what you've done.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Hey, Bull Barley, just to let you know, you should phone Little Guys before heading down there. We did take the last bottle off the shelf. I'm unaware if he's got more in the back or not.
Well, I can tell you that there was an emergency delivery of 3 bottles late this afternoon.
So that must
With everything I have in my basement.
Okay.
So our viewers, if we forget this, Yukon Dave is Yukon Brewing, and he is part of 2 brewers. He's our guy. He connects us to everything that's important in the world. Okay. Thanks, bud.
A little heavy, isn't it?
It is. That's all right. I'm drinking. Whenever you're drinking a bit, you can get a little bit heavy and a little bit pensive. We're good. All right. So Grudem and Works becomes the world's biggest distillery. Dr. Don also had a recent article called Cheers, eh? So if you're online, just Twitter, whichever, Cheers, A-E-H, and see what he has to say. It's a 1-pager, 10-minute read. And it seconds the notion that that Davin was presenting in the book, that they are the world's biggest. And he said that they were producing 2 million gallons of whiskey a year at that point, which I thought was pretty cool. So that leads into my question. What fact did you learn over the 4 chapters of Section 4 that make you proud to be Canadian or a Canadian whiskey lover? What do we got?
Well, I'll start if I may.
Sure.
I like the section that talked about how our Canadian whiskeys get their distinctive flavor from the cold. And so we have a lot to be proud of being in Canada, being tough and enjoying the winter weather. But now, as I'm driving by fields, whether it be in the winter or in the summer, I'm looking at how the cold has really brought out the esters and the other aromas in the grains to give Canadian whiskey its distinctive taste.
Beautiful. Very patriotic. Good.
Well, I really like that the Canadian government stepped in and gave us some guidelines where a lot of our whiskey production was going to the U.S. and the Americans liked it because it tasted so good compared to their loose guidelines that they had down there. I thought that was really interesting.
So you're talking about the 1 year or the 2 years, and then eventually the 3 years that it's in wood.
Yeah, the final 3 years, and reading some of those things there. I forget which distillery it was. They had a U.S. office in Peoria, Illinois, and they wouldn't follow the Canadian recipe by using
Walker,
wouldn't use the recipe quite right. They would just add basically ethanol to it, like Davin had said it probably in our first night. So I could see them taking some shortcuts there.
Well, you know what? A lot of that is marketing. I should have put an emoji in the book beside that quote from Corby, because the most important thing, as everyone says, is the story. And so he said that the Canadian grain tasted different because of the weather. Well, it's grown during the warm weather, except rye, which is planted in the fall and needs to get cold. But they do say that the best rye grain is grown in northern climates, where it's right on the edge of the range for the spirit, because it really stresses the grain. But every year the grain tastes different. And as far as the aging regulations go, that had nothing to do with quality. The government didn't have the slightest, remotest interest in the quality of the whiskey. Those aging regulations were put in place for two reasons. They
get rid of the little guy.
They got rid of the little guy because the little guys couldn't afford to age, and secondly, they got rid of the little guy because if anybody was selling white whiskey, they knew very well that they had not paid their taxes. So the main reason was to raise taxes. And I saw a letter between our Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Finance in Scotland about 25 years later. And all they talked about is, does aging the whiskey improve government revenue? And our people were saying, yes, we collected a lot more taxes because we were able to find out how much whiskey was actually being made. So, but the marketers, of course, have developed these wonderful stories about how the government helped whiskey by making us age it. Well, it's true, it does improve the flavor, but that was not the reason that they asked us to do it. Well, it was the farthest thing from their mind.
Which distillery was it that was laying whiskey down during Prohibition, and everybody thought they were crazy to be putting whiskey away in barrels, and he did it because he wanted a better quality whiskey because he knew eventually Prohibition would go away.
Yeah, that was Sam Bronfman who was doing that at Seagram's in Montreal.
Yeah,
but also way before this legislation came into place, Hiram Walker was laying down whiskey in Walker. Remember, Canadian Club was a 7-year-old whiskey when it was released in 1882. Before, like 8 years before the legislation required it be 2 years old. So a lot of them were doing that. And Corby had a lot of well-aged whiskey too in their warehouses in Corbyville. And
well, one of the distilleries, and I can never remember all the details, but they said that, well, we can't compete on price in the U.S., so we're going to compete on quality.
Yeah, that was Hiram Walker. Hiram Walker did that with his club whiskey, which later became Canadian Club. Yeah.
Yeah. And I never wanted to be in the commodity category. I've been selling stuff for years and years and years, and I don't want to go in there and say, yeah, I got just a lower price than the next guy.
Yeah,
I want to sell something. I want to have a story.
Yeah.
You want people to buy a second bottle.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Go to the first. Davin, we have a really good question coming out from the chat zone. So Bull Barley asked, Davin, do you see micro distillers surging upward or disappearing with the virus? Good question.
I think it's very challenging. I think that micro distillers that are well financed or well advanced will weather it out. I think those who are right on the cusp of, staying alive, people who are really just on the shoestring, I think they may find themselves more challenged. I think it's hard to know. I think we're going to lose some of them. I wrote a new book about distilleries in Canada, and have about 253 distilleries listed, 200 of them profiled. And everybody's got a copy, by God. So I really kind of did a lot of work with the micro distillers, and believe me, for a lot of them, it's really hand to mouth, and they make money from selling merchandise. They make money from operating a restaurant, from operating a bar. They make money from tourists, and a lot of that business is just gone. So I think it's a very challenging time. I hope we don't lose a lot of them. I really hope we don't lose very many or any at all. but it's it's rough, you know.
And we think they make tons of money when we spend $100 on a bottle, or let's say $40 on a bottle. Dave, you're the one telling me how much do
$15 tax. Yeah.
What's the tax markup on these guys? How much do they take?
Basically, just $13.80.
$13.80.
Yeah, it's
Per bottle.
within pennies. That's federal.
Unless it's past strength, and then it's more, right? But
well, over 60% alcohol, it goes up a little bit. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
I think that you're lucky in Alberta. I remember 10 or 15 years ago, someone from Canadian Club telling me that on a $27 bottle of Canadian Club sold at LCBO, they make $2.65, from which they have to pay their expenses for making it.
Wow.
Plus, they make 10 million bottles, don't they?
Well, sure.
Yeah, but still, the bottle costs, the liquid costs, you got to pay people. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of profit out of that. What are they making? 10 cents a bottle out of it?
Yeah. All right. I got two facts that I want to add to this that we haven't said yet. So, John Graves Simcoe, the Upper Canada Lieutenant Governor, encouraged distilling excess grains into liquor, which is in opposition, what it seemed, to what the Scottish were doing at the time, where they were trying to shut down the individuals, the independents, the illegitimate stills. So, and Davin, you can correct me if this was just, I don't know, if he was just doing this for larger or larger groups and not just the small individual guy. So that was one. And the other one was whiskey was the largest tax revenue in Canada in the 1800s. So at the time where we're reading it. So our country was built in part on our love of whiskey, which I really, really like. So Davin, tell me about that, though. Simcoe, was it just the larger distillers that he was encouraging?
No. He wanted to sell still licenses and collect taxes.
That's it.
So he encouraged people to do that so that they could get revenue for the coffers from the small and the large distillers.
And
now, there are numbers
Scotland
that are tossed around about how many distillers there were out there. And these numbers are just kind of guesses. Like they say, 200 distillers.
Yeah.
That's 200 licenses. Not even all of them may have had a still. And there were lots of other stills that didn't have licenses. But, or they say 51 licenses in Ontario. That doesn't mean there were 51 distilleries.
Right.
So, but no, he encouraged it because he wanted to get the revenues.
Do you remember or how much they made per person or per group? Or what was a license, one license, or was a license based on how many liters or gallons at that point?
They licensed stills.
Okay.
They licensed the still. Yeah.
One still, one license. Yeah.
Yeah. But different rates depending on the volume of the still.
All right. Good stuff, guys. Time to talk prohibition. And I find it a sexy thing. I like the whole story. I like the Volstead Act 1920. And I've been reading some books against, bourbon and their fight to actually exist. And I learned a couple things. So how about you guys with prohibition? Can anyone add something about prohibition before I throw my 2 cents in there?
I wasn't around for that.
You were too, Dave, you liar. 1920, you were there, man.
Well, prohibition is a little bit like what we're going through right now with the coronavirus shutting things down. Prohibition shut things down. And with the distillers then going to selling their product to smugglers, it's more out of survival, I think, than out of choice. Because I think they'd rather go the legal way, like you said. People didn't make a lot of money selling their product to smugglers. And I just see some parallels with people today where either they shut down their business or they have to smuggle maybe their products out.
That's pretty cool. That's a good one. A little bit like cannabis, maybe. It's legal now, but I don't know. There's some combinations there. Some things we could see.
Well, I guess we now have Amazon, so people can still send off their shirts and their non-essential items. But imagine we were going through this right now without Amazon. People would be smuggling their stuff out to customers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to throw out a quote, page 113. Although a few individuals profited immensely from prohibition, sales of Canadian whiskey to smugglers could not match lost sales to legitimate distributors. So that took me by surprise. I didn't think that. I thought everyone got rich on it. I thought everyone had their own little army and, well, their own flotilla, their own little navy, which they distributed to. So, and we'll talk about Hatch and others in a second, but I really thought a lot of our companies did really well at the time. So that really surprised me, Davin.
Yeah, most of them went out of business or came close to going out of business. It was really rough. They lost 90% of their market. So it was really difficult to stay afloat.
Well, unless you're Lefroy. Lefroy was the only one that was allowed into the U.S. because the border patrols always thought that it was a medicine because there's no way.
Really? That's a great story. The peak.
Now they call it Dr. Buckley's.
Yeah.
I love the peak. And I'm going to add to this because I really like this piece of our history and the Americans. So we'll talk about Hatch, and he worked for Corby, I think, at the beginning of this. Did he not, Davin?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right. And it's really, really interesting. So he was a really smart guy. The Temperance Act, 1916 in Ontario, made it so the distillers couldn't sell any whiskey. So what Hatch does is he sends his whiskey to Montreal, to their plant in Montreal, I guess, which enabled them to transport it to Ontario, and they were allowed to import it. That wasn't against the law. They were not allowed to sell it. So he went Montreal back to them, which was really kind of smart for this guy Hatch. And the other one, which is really cool and rebellious, and the underground sales network that he set up. And I'll just read this. Hatch's Navy, a loosely organized but highly effective flotilla of wharf rats, fishermen, and his own fleet of 42 boats were able to get his product into the States. So Corby, now we talk about Good German Worts, which went down, so almost became bankrupt. Or Davin, I think they stopped making whiskey at the time.
They actually closed, yeah.
Okay. And Corby's doesn't. Corby's expands. They do really well with this guy at their head. And Davin, if you could take just a couple minutes, tell me about the relationship, because I wanted to find out more between Hatch and the owner, and how Hatch thought he was going to become a partner maybe, and then the owner says, no, I don't want any part of it.
Yeah, well, Mortimer Davis owned Corby's, and he was, I guess a bit of a snob or something like that. He hired Hatch, but never really respected him to sell the whiskey because he knew Hatch had a good network. Hatch worked with Larry McGuinness, by the way. Hatch and McGuinness were selling their whiskey in the States. But Hatch was under the impression that he could become a partner in the firm. And when he went to exercise his option, Mortimer Davis said, I don't remember that, So Hatch left, and he bought Gooderham & Worts, which was now, closed. He put that back in operation, turned into a really profitable business, all selling whiskey to the States through his network. And it made enough money that he could then buy Hiram Walker distillery, which Mortimer Davis was trying to buy.
Yeah.
But Hatch got in there and got it from him. And actually later when Davis died, Hatch bought the Corby distillery as well. So that's why they're all concentrated in Hiram Walker's in London. Gooderham & Worts doesn't exist anymore. Walker's or Wiser's doesn't exist anymore. Corby's doesn't exist anymore as distilleries, but their brands, their labels have moved down to Hatch's distillery in Windsor, which was Hiram Walker. Their labels, and I should say, and their recipes have moved down to. Well, we don't know about Wiser's recipes because Wiser's recipes probably got lost when his distillery was sold to Corby. But anyway,
doesn't that sound like a cool movie though?
Yeah,
Like his kind of a rags to riches thing for this guy. He's in competition with Corby, who is, let's say, a snob, but let's say the upper class. Hatch is not. He's from the lower class, I'm guessing.
He's a bartender, yeah.
But working man, and works his way up. A little bit shifty, which is okay for me. I'm okay with the shiftiness. And he builds an empire because of how intelligent he is, or his ability to manipulate a situation. I think it's fantastic. Anyway.
He did a wonderful job. Nothing like what Seagram's did, though. Seagram's totally dominated and Sam Bronfman was just brilliant. Out of Montreal, they really kind of, everybody else was a bit of a footnote.
That's next week, because I haven't read that far yet. So don't spoil it for me, Davin. I'm only going as far as we're doing every week. So don't spoil it.
Okay, I won't spoil it, but I will say it was the butler in the library with a lead pipe.
Excellent.
Not the candlestick. Oh,
I'm reading a book on the history of Labatt's.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you're talking about colorful characters. The brewery had those same guys that worked there in the shadows and did all kinds of stuff. And once Prohibition lifted, they kind of distanced themselves from those guys, so they wanted to look respectable again.
Yeah.
And so there's a real correlation between the beer and the whiskey. What's that?
Were they related to the mob? And we'll talk about Hatch. Was he the mob? Like, is he part and parcel of it all?
They sold to gangsters in operating out of Hamilton.
Yeah.
Bronfman sold to gangsters in the States, but neither of them actually were mobsters. No, they weren't. No.
Well, I thought Al Capone was involved in the beer trade.
Well, he was a customer.
Yeah. Just had to get it over the border.
Yeah, Al Capone, by the way, he's the best known of those guys, but he was really a minor figure. The others let him take all the limelight. He was a narcissist who loved being in the paper, so they said, "Oh, let him chat."
Go ahead.
Everyone's going to think it was him, and meanwhile, we can go on and our kids can become the president of the United States and stuff like that.
Oh, because you talked about those New England people. I think it was that gained a lot of money out of this. Yeah. Do you want to tell us any more about that, Davin? No? Okay, I'll put you on the spot. But
here tomorrow.
From a history guy, if you love history, this is really fun for me. So it's a bit geeky. I'm a math teacher, but I have my history major. So I get my geek on doing this with the whiskey and the history. I just love it. All right, we're going to finish off this week with this last bit. So what do you find interesting about the following Henry Corby quote? So Henry, the son, from the early 1880s. Here it is. And we've referred to it a couple times, and I think it's Dave that said this. Page 118, the fact that the extremely cold weather of Canadian winters adds a peculiar quality. No, this was Ryan, sorry. A peculiar quality to Canadian cereals in the form of certain esters and aromatic compounds which Canadian distillers have learned to preserve. It is these esters that make the bouquet of Canadian rye and bourbon whiskey. I didn't know we did bourbon whiskey, but that's fine. So distinctly pleasant. So for me, it's what's really neat is how specific and scientific his outlook seems to be at this time. He talks about esters, aromatic compounds, and I thought that was something that's part of our time, like the past 30 years. But no, we're going back 140 years, right? It's pretty interesting. Anyone else kind of something else that comes out of this quote, especially about Canadian whiskey? I'm sitting back.
I think there's a large element of marketing involved in that.
Thank you, Dan.
Davin, taking the feel of marketing, what really stood out for me was on page 113, it's talking about when Prohibition was repealed and the legal channels for distribution were reactivated, the U.S. was playing catch-up. They had new equipment, new production methodologies, but Canadians were producing their whiskey. What happened where we were, it sounded like leading, and all of a sudden the U.S. pops up and takes over? What happened?
Well, I mean, they restarted their distilling industry in the States. Mind you, they had new stills, new buildings, new processes. It was not the way it had been before. I mean, bourbon distilleries were traded on paper, for a while during Prohibition. So when they restarted, it was not the same thing at all. But yes, they started making it locally, and people went back to buying it. But what people don't know is that a lot of those bottles of bourbon were filled with Canadian whiskey, because Canada made bourbon that was just like the American bourbon. We made rye like the American rye. Corby was a perfect example. They had a recipe for making Canadian rye and a different recipe for making American rye. They made bourbon like crazy. I think they made like bourbon and American rye in a ratio of about 3-to-1 to what they made of Canadian rye and Canadian whiskey up here. So we sold that stuff to them, and to the Americans, and they put it in their bottles. And just like Whistle Pig, everyone thinks Whistle Pig is American. It's made in Canada. The same thing was happening back then. But yeah, when American distilling started up again, they started selling their own whiskey. But by then, people had developed such a taste for Canadian whiskey that it still remained the best-selling whiskey in the United States, even with all their distilleries starting up again. The other thing too is that the Americans really moved more into blended whiskey and making whiskey with using a lot of neutral spirits. Everybody just, when they think of American whiskey, they think of bourbon, but truthfully, bourbon was nowhere in 2000. Nobody was drinking it. This is a really kind of a new phenomenon in whiskey, the popularity of bourbon right now. People say bourbon as if that represents American whiskey, but it's just not the case, I mean, you think of thing like Seagram 7 today sells 3 million cases of whiskey a year, still, and that's a whiskey that's 80% neutral spirits. So it's people talk about bourbon, but it's like single malt. People think single malt is Scotch, but of course, 90% of the Scotch people drink is blended Scotch today.
Right. All right. Good answer, and a little bit surprised, but we'll talk about that when we come back to the after dram, because I want to wrap this up. There is one question by Bull Barley, and I'll read it now, but we'll come back to it in the after dram. And Davin, it's to you, I think.
Okay.
20 years, this Bull Barley. 20 years ago, I walked past the great distillery in Windsor. It was locked down like they were Fort Knox. No chance of visiting. Any changes there? Actually, let's answer it now. It shouldn't be.
Absolutely. It's under different management now, and yes, once a month they invite people in to their visitor center. As far as going through the distillery itself, that's still difficult. You have to have a reason to, if you're a journalist or something like that, to go through there. But yeah, you can get into the visitor center. You can do your own blending session, and it's really it's a pretty cool visit, honestly. Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that's it for our Whisky Book Club tonight. Thank you to all our whiskey brothers and sisters, past, present, and future out there. Thank you to our people are beautiful. And a special thank you to Davin for joining us again tonight to talk about your book. And let's show it. We've all got the book.
Yep.
Canadian Whiskey, the new portable expert. Please join us next week, April 25th.
And this is my new book.
Section
How do I get on screen yet?
In the mail, Davin.
So we hope to see you again in 5 minutes. And that's how much time it takes me to get organized, go to washroom, come back. And we're doing our more informal gathering called the After Dram right here on this channel. Tune in, more comments. We stay in the 6-panel thing because we're just talking back and forth. So everybody go bathroom break, pour a little bit more in your glass, enjoy yourselves, and I'll see you all back in 5 minutes. Davin, I always give you the last word when you're on. I'm going to face you. Here you go.
Well, thank you very much for having me and for reviewing my book. It was really exciting writing that book, and I find Canadian whiskey truly a fascinating subject. I've visited distilleries in Taiwan, in India, in South America, North America, Scotland, Ireland, Europe, and Canada is right there with the very best of them. We make a spirit that is as good as anybody else's, and we make whiskeys that taste just as good as anybody else's. So, cheers.
Excellent. See you. Thank you very much. And back to us. We're going to have a fantastic time in the After Dram. And for those of you that join us for the After Dram, again, more informal. We're there for a while. It's done an hour. And guys, 54 minutes. I tried to do a half an hour. I really did. we did our tasting at 15 minutes. I don't know what happens, but the time flies. I love spending my time with you guys, and I'll see you back in 5 minutes.
That was the quickest hour I've ever been involved in. Like it just goes by so quick.
It's good. It's because of it's the information. It's the subject matter, man.
It's the whiskey
And the drink. And all the whiskey going down too. Cheers, guys. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Dolph.
Cheers.